Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Investopedia just put out an article saying the American dream now costs $5 million. And here's a direct quote from their article. Investopedia's 2025 report found the American dream now costs over $5 million per household over the course of a lifetime. However, the median lifetime earnings of an individual American with a bachelor's degree is only $2.8 million. Immediately, I don't like how they frame this. What we are meant to infer as the reader is that there's a huge mismatch between the ideal lifestyle and reasonably what the educated American could earn in a lifetime. In other words, the math doesn't add up, so we can't reasonably expect most people to be able to afford the American dream. The intent here is to cause frustration, to cause disbelief, and a sense of urgency about financial planning. I would go further to say that this article is written in a way that it is intentionally meant to be discouraging to the reader. But there's a problem. Not only is this article flawed, it is flat out wrong on so many levels. So let's break it down. So let's walk through what Investopedia actually included in this so-called $5 million price tag for the American dream. They've got retirement at just over $1.6 million. Healthcare around $414,000. Owning a home, that price tag is around $960,000. Raising 2 kids and paying for 4 years of college for each, around $876,000. Then there's owning cars, which they peg at a staggering $900,000 over the course of a lifetime. Then they throw in vacations around $180,000, pets around $40,000, and even a wedding around $38,000. Add it all together, and they land on this headline number of over $5 million per household. But as I said, there are glaring problems with many of these numbers, so let's break it down by category. Let's break down the $1.6 million retirement claim. They start with average spending of about $64,000 for adults over 65. They say they project this money to last for a 20-year retirement. Quick math shows us that they simply reverse engineered the 4% rule. So in other words, to support about $64,000 a year in spending, they say you would need $1.6 million as an investment portfolio. But right away, the math falls apart. They completely ignore the power of compounding. They assume our retiree is not eligible for Social Security, and they are double counting housing, Medicare, and transportation, categories they've already broken out and counted separately. Because that $64,000 annual spending for the average retiree includes housing, Medicare, and transportation. So let's take a moment to talk about the 4% rule. Recent research has shown that this 4% number could actually be updated to 4.7%, and it's intended to fund a 30-year retirement, not a 20-year retirement. If you're instead trying to fund a 20-year retirement, research shows that you can reasonably expect to take 5.5% or 6.5% from your portfolio and sustain a 20-year retirement. But let's set aside their double counting for a moment, and we'll set their withdrawal rate aside, and we'll focus on the two biggest errors: compounding and Social Security. Social Security alone covers a big chunk of that $64,000 target. If we have a single retiree receiving the average Social Security check of $2,000 a month, that's $24,000 a year. If we have a dual income household, each receiving the average check, they're going to receive around $48,000 a year. So for a single individual, we would now have a $40,000 gap that would need to be filled from investing. And assuming we use a safe rate of withdrawal of 4.7%, they would need a portfolio of around $851,000. For couples, we only have a $16,000 gap, which means our portfolio needed to fill this gap would only be $340,000. Already, we're much lower than this $1.6 million figure. Now, let's talk about compounding, because you don't just show up at retirement and magically expect to have this money in hand. Instead, you consistently save and invest throughout your entire working career, and compounding is a big help doing the heavy lifting along the way. For our single individual targeting $851,000 invested, if they started saving at the age of 25 and did so for 40 years, receiving an 8% rate of return, they would just need to save $244 a month, and they would hit this target. By the time they were 65, of their portfolio, $117,000 would be their own personal contributions. $734,000 of this portfolio would be the result of compounding. Let's break it down for a couple targeting $340,000 in investments. They would only need to save $97 a month from age 25 to 65. By the age of 65, with this portfolio, only $47,000 would be from their personal contributions. $293,000 would come from growth. So here, retirement really costs $47,000 or $117,000, not $1.6 million. And this is why articles like this drive me crazy. They are intentionally framing retirement as impossible, when in reality, if you are consistent with saving over a long period of time, it is very achievable. Next up, we have healthcare coming to around $414,000 by Investopedia, spanning from ages 22 to 83. And no question, this is a major expense. And honestly, this number is not that outrageous, especially if you factor in maybe hospital stays, surgeries, deductibles, co-pays, prescriptions. Add that up over a lifetime, it's going to be expensive. But there is some important context. Many costs are subsidized. Over 60% of U.S. adults get coverage through an employer or through a spouse. For an individual plan, the annual premium averages around $9,000, but employees on average only pay $1,400 to $1,500, with employers covering the rest. For family coverage, the total cost may hit $25,000, but the employee usually pays closer to $6,000 or $7,000 a year. Once you hit the age of 65 and Medicare kicks in, these costs shift again. The average spend for a typical retiree is about $2,800 to $3,500 a year. So let's run these numbers across Investopedia's timeline. From age 22 to 64, employer coverage might run $1,500 a year, or $63,000 total. From ages 65 to 83, Medicare might come in on the high end at $3,500 a year. That's going to add another $63,000. Combined, we're looking at about $126,000. Now this number does feel low because it's only looking at the premiums, and once you start to use your medical insurance, you might have lab tests and co-pays or a big medical event which could certainly drive these numbers up over the course of a lifetime. So a more realistic estimate comes from Health Services Research, which studied 3.75 million households and said the average American spent closer to $350,000 over a lifetime. And if at the end of life you need memory care or long-term care, that number can easily balloon. But Investopedia didn't include those figures in their healthcare number, so we're not going to include them here. Next, let's tackle housing. Investopedia assumes that you buy the median home in 2025 selling for $415,000, that you put 20% down, take out a 30-year fixed loan at 6.69%, they add in insurance and property taxes, and boom, your total cost comes to about $958,000. And honestly, there's a lot of variability here. If you live in the Midwest in a low cost of living area, maybe you can snag a home for $300,000 or maybe even less. But if you live on one of the coasts, odds are your housing costs are going to be much higher. So we are going to use Investopedia's figure here. On the loan terms that they gave, your monthly mortgage would be about $2,100 a month before taxes and insurance. But here's where things get interesting. What if you were able to make just one extra monthly payment a year towards the principal? That works out to be $178 per month. If you could stick with that for the entire course of your loan, you could shave 6 years off your mortgage, pay it off in 24 years instead of 30. Total savings on interest would be roughly $99,000. To me, that's worth it. And I'm going to assume if we have a group of people out there who's watching financial videos, that they're motivated to find a way to do this. So we'll assume that you can pull this off and that you do save $100,000 or so in interest. That would drop housing costs to around $859,000. And remember, if rates fall in the future, you can always refinance, and that move alone could save you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. One of the best financial moves you can do is to keep your housing costs manageable. It's likely the biggest expense you're ever going to face, so right-size your house and everything in life will be that much easier. Now let's talk about weddings. Investopedia uses $38,200 as the average wedding cost. Now that figure is relatively high compared to what other sources have published as average wedding costs, which tend to range from $30,000 to $33,000, maybe on the high end $35,000. But here's the thing, weddings are wildly subjective. It's a party, it's a special party, but it's a party. And at the end of the day, you get to decide how much you want to spend on this. And let's take a moment to talk about average here. You'll notice that Investopedia is conveniently using an average in every single spending category, but they're stacking the average spending up next to the median lifetime earnings. There's going to be a problem when we stack averages next to medians. So let's get back to this $38,000 figure for the average wedding. This is skewed upward by people who spend a great deal on their wedding. I think more appropriately would be to use a median figure, and the median spend on a wedding is around $10,000. So that's the number I want to use because you can absolutely have a beautiful memory-filled day for about $10,000. You don't have to spend $40,000. You can if you want to, and it's entirely up to you. Spend what you wish on your wedding. But the number I'm going to use here for this figure, $10,000. Next, we have the cost of raising 2 children and 4 years of college for those two, coming in around $876,000. They assume that college costs $230,000 total for the 2 children, which is on the higher end, but still in line with what you'd expect for 4 years of in-state tuition, room, and board. So for the sake of fairness, we'll accept this figure. But what about raising a child from birth through age 18? According to the USDA, Northwestern Mutual, Credit Karma, and Smart Assets, the cost of raising a single child from birth to age 18 is about $325,000. But here's the catch. If you have more than one child, all costs don't double. Families experience what economists call economies of scale. Certain expenses like housing, utilities, internet, and even transportation don't double simply because you had another child. And children often share toys and clothes, other hand-me-downs. Maybe they even share a bedroom. Of course, not everything scales this way. Childcare for 2 kids is essentially double. Food and healthcare, that scales linearly, so in reality, we experience a mix. Economists suggest that adding a second child increases costs not by 100%, but by about 60%. Using that factor, raising 2 children from birth to 18 might cost closer to $520,000. Then you add in that $230,000 for college, and you're looking at roughly $750,000. This is still a very high number, but it's significantly less than the number used by Investopedia. And here's a final point. Kids can be as expensive or as affordable as you want them to be. Yes, certain costs are fixed, but there's a lot of discretion on how you decide to raise a family. You might spend weekends at the park, at the library, or free community events, or maybe you have paid for activities, private lessons, and travel. There's no right or wrong answer. It depends on the parenting style that you want. Next up, we have buying new vehicles. Over the course of a lifetime, Investopedia pegs this at over $900,000 for a household. Investopedia assumes that you buy 2 brand new cars every 10 years and that you finance them and keep that cycle going consistently from age 22 through 75. The question becomes, do you really need 12 brand new cars as a household throughout the course of your entire life? That's a personal question that you get to answer. They also use the current average vehicle price, which is anywhere from $48,000 to $49,000, and then add in maintenance and insurance for each of these vehicles. All of that gives them their headline number, assuming $267,000 in the cost of car plus loan payments per person, then add in insurance and maintenance, and now we have about $450,000 per person, or over $900,000 for a 2-car household over a lifetime. But again, we have a lot of individual discretion here. What if we make some small adjustments? How would that play out? Instead of replacing our cars every 10 years, what if we replace them every 15 years? Per person, that drops our costs on an individual level to $361,000 for a 2-car household. That brings it to $722,000 over a lifetime. What if you were able to avoid financing your cars altogether? I understand this is not what the typical American does, but for those who are financially savvy, they do try to save up and pay for their cars in cash. So we'll assume that our household is able to do that. We'll assume they are still buying those very expensive average price cars of about $48,000 or $49,000, but they're paying for them outright. How would that change things? Of course, we have to add in insurance and maintenance. Now, per person, our costs over a lifetime come to $331,000, replacing a vehicle every 15 years with a brand new vehicle. For a 2-car household, we're looking at $661,000. Now let's make one last adjustment. Let's say that both you and your spouse don't have to drive $48,000 or $50,000 vehicles over the course of your lifetime. Instead, maybe you go a little bit more modest and you drive a $35,000 brand new vehicle. What might that change these numbers to? Well, assuming you replace your vehicles with brand new ones every 15 years, this gets you to a household total of around $614,000. That is a huge gap compared to their $900,000 figure. But that's the problem with these blanket assumptions. Not every American needs to finance a $50,000 vehicle every decade. And as a matter of fact, they don't need to do that twice every decade. Many people are much more comfortable buying a more modest vehicle or buying a lightly used vehicle or driving their vehicle for longer or doing all of these 3 things. You can easily have a much lower lifetime car budget and still drive safe and reliable vehicles. The final 2 categories are owning a pet, coming in around $40,000, and taking a yearly vacation, totaling $181,000 over the course of a lifetime. These are not really categories that I'm going to touch. First off, the annual cost of a vacation using this number comes to around $2,867. I think that's incredibly reasonable. When it comes to pets and vacations, they can be as expensive or as affordable as you want them to be. Some people want to be pet owners, some people don't want to be pet owners. I am a pet owner myself, and I think most pet owners would say the same thing. Our pets are worth every penny we spend on them for the love they give back to us. But I can say within this household, we err on the side of frugality, so I doubt that my pet is costing that much over the course of a lifetime. But when it comes to these numbers, there's a lot of discretion involved, and you can make them as high or as frugal as you want them to be. Now let's take a moment and figure out the grand total based on the figures that I used. And also, please keep in mind that the vast majority of these figures presented here are based on averages, so they are going to skew to the higher end. We have retirement costs that range from $47,000 to $117,000, depending on whether you're a single or a dual income earning household, $350,000 for healthcare, $859,000 for homeownership, $10,000 for a wedding, $750,000 for raising 2 children and paying for college, $614,000 for a lifetime of vehicles, $40,000 for pets, and $181,000 for vacations. Ultimately, we end up with an American dream costing somewhere around $2.9 million. Now, don't get me wrong, that is certainly not cheap, but it is drastically less than what Investopedia presented. And you have a lot of discretion here. You could spend less in any or all of these categories and have a lifestyle that is still very well lived, but comes in at a much lower price tag. And here's truly why I don't like this type of presentation. There is so much variability. What house you buy, what car you drive, how many children you have, where you live, what your cost of living looks like, whether you own a pet, whether you don't, whether you take a big vacation every single year, whether you don't. On top of that, framing the American dream as, hey, if you want to be able to afford it, you have to have $5 million, kind of has a way of planting this misleading belief that you need to have $5 million today in order to make it happen. And very few people have $5 million sitting in the bank. And the truth is, you don't need $5 million. Heck, you don't even need $2.9 million. What you need is to be able to afford the lifestyle you want to live. And that really comes down to having a steady income and a lifestyle that stays below your expenses. And paycheck by paycheck and year by year with consistent habits, you will build up your investment accounts and you will pay off your home and you will pay off your cars. And if you're diligent, you may even be able to pay for your children's college. None of this is easy, but it's also not impossible. It comes down to keeping your lifestyle in check and staying consistent. And here's another reality. Being a part of a dual income household helps tremendously because you're able to share costs. Now, whether or not that is a lifestyle you want, that's completely up to you. But I never like to put the message out there that a quality life is unaffordable or out of reach, because with a little diligence and consistent habits, it's not. So now let's go back to this article from Investopedia and really talk about why I dislike it so much. The piece is titled, "The 2025 American Dream Now Costs More Than $5 million." Right from the start, the tone is clear. If you don't have $5 million, you can't be successful. You can't live the American dream. And that's absolutely false. But then they double down. The line from how I opened this video. Investopedia's 2025 report found that the American dream now costs over $5 million per household over the course of a lifetime. However, the median lifetime earnings of an individual American with a bachelor's degree is only $2.8 million. This is deliberately framed in a way that the typical person would not be able to afford the American dream. But then there's also one other section of this article that I want to zoom in on. Generally, a section of an article that looks like this is reserved for a poll quote or a key takeaway. The average American with a bachelor's degree will earn approximately $2.2 million less over their lifetime than the cost of the American dream, requiring at least a college-educated dual-income household to make it possible. They have a superscript here, and they footnote with a reference to an article from Georgetown. The implication here is that research from Georgetown backs up Investopedia's claim that the American dream costs $5 million, and that's misleading. Because the Georgetown report simply says that the median lifetime earnings of a bachelor's degree holder is $2.8 million. It says absolutely nothing about the American dream costing $5 million. Investopedia then takes a median earning figure and stacks it against their inflated, and this is very important, average dream number, not median, a number that double counts categories, misrepresents costs, and takes plenty of artistic liberties to make it look bigger than it actually is. This is why I despise articles like this. They are deliberately deceptive and intentionally discouraging. The message here is no matter what you do, you are set up for failure. You cannot win with your money. That's the narrative they're pushing, and that is not the narrative we need to put out there. Articles like this push that all too common narrative in personal finance. Narratives like, if you don't have $1 million, you're never going to be able to retire. If you're not maxing out your investment accounts every single year, you're never going to be secure. If you didn't start investing at the age of 18, you're already behind. If you don't earn a six-figure income, you can't live comfortably. Or it feels like if you make one mistake with a student loan or buying a home at the wrong time, that you've completely ruined your chances. These messages are everywhere, and they push the same theme. The theme that if you're not perfect, you're doomed. What we really need are resources that show people how to succeed with money, not ones that say, hey, no matter how hard you try, you're never going to win. And that's where I think this article completely contradicts Investopedia's own mission statement. They say Investopedia was founded in 1999 with the mission of helping people improve their financial outcomes. Then, if we move over to their editorial policy, they add, our mission is to simplify complex financial information and decisions so that our readers have the confidence to manage every aspect of their financial life. But this article does the exact opposite. Instead of building confidence, it discourages. Instead of simplifying, it inflates. Instead of helping their reader see a path forward, they try to convince them that it's completely out of reach. So, what are your thoughts on this article? Post them down below because I'm very curious. As you know, this article was not a home run for me. We need less articles like this online, and I hope we do not see articles like this from Investopedia going forward. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. So I hope it comes across in my videos, but I'm a pretty optimistic person. I'm pretty happy. I always say that happiness is my default setting. People say that in my life. I'm going to try and be as positive as I can throughout this video, but this article genuinely upset me. Like, I lost sleep over this. So frustrated. So I'm gonna put the frustration aside. I'm not happy though. I'm not happy. Not happy. Put a smile on. We're gonna bring positivity to this, but so not happy. This is the worst article. This is the worst. I'm so upset. I don't even know. I have no words. Articles like this drive me crazy. Seriously. I mean, I don't think I was too hard on that article, but it was the worst. It was loosey-goosey at best. At best, loosey-goosey.